Three and hey, what's up? This is Wilsfer again, and I got Lard back with me for Abysmal Hymns. We're gonna go through our top five conspiracy theories. Uh, I think you probably know what a conspiracy is because you clicked on this, so you obviously have to have a half of an interest in it. If not, the definition is coming up as when two or more people are plotting something. And a lot of the definitions seem to imply that it had to be unlawful or harmful. I mean, I guess your perspective, I think that everybody is the hero of their own story, so I don't think anybody is like setting out to be malevolent, but who knows? I don't know. So yeah, and I'm also for mine, I'm not getting into things like mythology or religion because some of that kind of shifts culture to culture. So I think a lot of times the simplest form of asking, is there any weight behind a conspiracy theory is, does somebody have something to gain? And if the question is yes, then we got motive. So, Lard, how about you start us off with your number one pick? And these don't necessarily have to be in order.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we should start off strong then, because you specifically said you want to talk about religion, and I have a conspiracy that involves religion.
It can
So,
involve religion. It's just the religion itself might not
gotcha,
be.
gotcha. But let's actually wait. I'll just drop that little teaser. I'll be start with my first one, and I blame your lady for this because we got an argument once about it, and ever since I was like, it's my mission to get in the mindset of people who believe this. So number one is the world is flat. World is flat. And so what should I just jump into why I think that? Or
Yeah, I mean, whatever thoughts you have on that. For
well,
me, I'll say that that's one that I have problem with finding the motive. I mean, I know it's a huge thing, but I
yeah.
never get what like people have to gain by being flat. I mean,
Because it's against the round, the cult of the round.
right.
And why would we join the cult of the round when we can argue for the cult of the flat? So so yeah, this one I think I chose it just because it's a topic that's fun to argue because it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. But in my own practice, I spent a lot of time trying to understand infinity and like quantum theory. And so once you get in the quantum world, form is irrelevant. I mean, so why not? Why can't the world be flat? Why can't it be the shape of a car? It could be really any shape. And so from that standpoint, I was like, sure, the world is flat. I mean, we're walking on it. We don't feel that curve of the earth per se. You know, in fact, I would even argue that the world isn't round. Um, I do argue that it's not shaped. So, or polyphonic is another way to say it.
Right, right. I mean, I guess if it's a simulation, it would be on a grid, maybe.
Right, right.
And there is some belief system that says the world is like on the shell of a giant tortoise that flies through the universe.
Yeah,
So that would be kind of oblong, I suppose. I guess it depends on the tortoise. I mean, if it's the tortoise in a video game, then it could be if it depends on the technology. If it's like, you know, 8-bit video game, then it could be like a squared off tortoise.
so
Okay, the world is flat. I can get down with that. I understand that. I know why people are into it. There's full ass documentaries on it. Those are like really interesting, just like people watching. Um, but I guess, it's n nothing that I've really been down a rabbit hole. I mean, I have some friends that are super into it, and then there's a weird, like, it's kind of like with conspiracy realists, how it's almost like being into metal. You can get into like first you got people that are just like, okay, 9/11 was a hoax and there's something going on at Area 51. I kind of see that as like people that are just into like Metallica and Megadeth. Then once you get into um aliens created the world, then you're into like Morbid Angel and Deicide. Then once you get into like the earth being flat and birds aren't real, then we're in from there, we're like that's like harsh noise grindcore,
Yeah.
just barely music at that point. So we build up a tolerance, and I've why I think a lot of it because I know the friends down here that I have that they're into like flat Earth smoke a ton of weed. Like and I don't know if that's something. Maybe that's the conspiracy. If you like the government's putting stuff in weed that where if you smoke enough of it, you think that the world is flat.
Honestly, I'm still waiting for the reality TV show. Or like, let's search for the end because the world.
I'm sure it's coming. It'll be
I
on
can't wait.
Netflix.
If you're
It'll
watching
be on
this, take
Netflix.
that
It'll be
idea.
called This World Be Flat.
Yeah.
And
It's
yeah.
gold. It's gold. All right, let's skip ahead to your top
All
favorite.
right, mine, and this is just number one in what up is on my list. It's not maybe my top favorite one, but it's one that I've acquired in recent years.
Okay.
And two of these have to do with music, which I guess is not surprising. Um, but my number one is going to be the Taylor Swift
Oh
conspiracy,
no.
which proposes that Taylor Swift is gay. Now, the motive in this is very strong motive. And it's not nothing new. I mean, it kind of goes, it's an extension of the old Hollywood mafia, the pink lavender mafia in Hollywood that is running a gay conspiracy. The gay conspiracy really just being marketing, that we
Right.
know that we can't sell these gay actors to housewives in Idaho. Just like Taylor Swift knows that if she came out, she could not tour in certain countries.
Right.
Her album sales would decrease. She
Mhm.
has a really marginal fan base that, she has some of the lavender haired people, but she also has, a lot of like just teenagers in Nebraska, because she
They
has
all
this
look the same.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like she's not like Miley Cyrus where she's never pushed the envelope so far to where she just, smoked a bunch of meth and started twerking. She's always kind of held some decorum so
Yeah.
she could be marketed at Target. Um, Even though she's kind of, she pushes the envelope creatively with where she can do with her music, kind of like a David Bowie type thing. But I think that there's a clear-cut shift in when this happens. I think that I'm not saying that she's always been gay. I think that she probably um was hanging around a certain crowd and kind of discovered she was.
Mm.
And because a lot of people don't come out until they're in their 40s or whatever, it's like a journey. A lot of the more
Right.
people learn about themselves, the way that shifts. Perfectly fine. And I'm not against her being, I'm for either way. Um, but I think right before the Reputation album came out, that's when she was like in a relationship with this supermodel and was like, well, I gotta let people know in a very subtle way, just for my own personal sense of sanity. So then that's when, like in the first video for "Look What You Made Me Do," she said that Taylor Swift was dead and she couldn't come to the phone. And then later she did that video for The Man where she's in full drag and it makes sense. And her relationships have always been high profile people who would also have something to gain for her being their beard or I mean, look at the ratings for Chiefs games as soon as she got into that. Like that became a cultural phenomenon that people are going to watch a football game just because they know that she was going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Marketing.
That's a lot of motive. That's a lot of money.
Mhm.
Um, and she became a billionaire during this time. So, there's obviously high profit motive. So, yeah, so there we go. Taylor Swift's game. There's plenty of stuff on the internet to look it up.
Yeah, I don't. follow her in general. In fact, when you originally shared that you were a fan, I did judge you a little bit, but you made a good case for yourself in that she does create all her own stuff. I think you said.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, that's cool. But I don't, in general, listen to that kind of music. Now, when you originally told me about the conspiracy, I did watch a couple of videos, and they were holy moly. I mean, but so I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the world that we live in, my next on the list is that we're living in a simulation or program. And that fits the program perfectly.
Hmm.
Everybody's supposed to, based on what you look like, fit into a very specific box. And if you break out of that box, it's a good chance they're going to be canceled. Or it might work in favor of the program for a little bit, but then they like whitewash over you. It's like if we can't use this for our agenda in some way, like you're saying, like what's the point of it? And I think you're right. If she was to come out of as gay, it's like when they had the gay clothing line at Target. You know,
Right.
like that did not go over
They're
well.
right next to the Taylor Swift shirts.
Right. um, Capitalism, I like to argue, does not care what color you are, what you believe in. The whole point is how can we make more money?
Right.
So, in fact, if there's more options, there's more money to be made. It's the fact that as consumers, we like to control the narrative to feel safe in our echo chamber or our delusions, as I like to say. Um, that we actually resist the difference for whatever fear nonsense. I mean, it's hard sometimes for some people to see the person you hate thriving. It's like, why
Right.
should that creepy person be allowed to exist, but I can't? It's like, well, you can. Anyway, that's sort of a side tangent. So, in terms of Taylor Swift not being able to be her authentic self per se, but be a billionaire, it's like maybe she's her authentic self behind closed doors or in
Right.
code.
Yeah.
In code.
Like, yeah, it's totally marketing and it kind of goes with the simulation thing. So I kind of see that as like, a video game or Dungeons and Dragons where you start off the game, you pick what kind of character you're gonna play,
Right.
you know. Um, Interestingly enough, almost like the Stanford prison experiment had this long D&D campaign that was running where everybody turned into chaotic evil characters because they realized what they could do anything. You could do anything. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't consequences because I was the dungeon master for that. So it's not saying that there weren't consequences for their actions when they did anything. But they liked having that freedom. And we had a guy that came in, and so I got rid of alignment pretty much and was like, your actions are going to dictate that. There's a guy who was like, oh, well, I want to be a lawful good paladin. Within the span of 4 hours, he yelled at his next turn, kill the priest. And um, so it was interesting to see how being in that group think where people were like doing that, a guy who was just role playing a character shifted.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think in the simulation, there's probably maybe that's part of the experiment, part of the who knows, for the characters to evolve and shift. And I mean, I like that conspiracy theory or theory of thinking because it kind of goes with another one that I didn't put on here because it's tied to religion, it's tied to Gnosticism, which is about the demiurge and the Archon, who is supposedly, the version of, I guess, what they call the Old Testament God, where it's a malevolent, evil entity that's God, and that it created a universe on top of another universe, and that we're imprisoned in that universe, and that now I've started hearing people talk about, and even like David Icke has gotten into it, how the ability of this thing is it can create anything, it just can't create it from scratch. It has to be based off something else.
Ooh,
So it's almost like AI, literally. And so I've seen people
yes.
beginning to like AI can't, it has to gather the information first. Like if you handed a blank piece of paper and just say create something, it can't. But if you feed it the information of what to create, it can replicate it and make it look new. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, so there's that. Which
That
that, that even goes with like the esoteric adage of as above, so below. So the as above could be the original imprint of whatever reality is, and the so below would be the lower frequency simulation that was created.
wow, that really I'm gonna have to look up that
Yeah, I
because
can send you some videos of it. It's starting to become more into mainstream
so
conspiracy realist culture.
I came to the same conclusion, but through from a different door.
Mhm.
Um, in my early work in PhD land, getting into the topic of the terror of aesthetics and how we live in a world that is all performance based on what things look like and not what they are. And I started, and this is technology is like AI wasn't out of the box yet. So I was looking at older video games to see how people acted, and it was like Second Life. And I thought it was really interesting that technology, video games specifically, give you the opportunity to create whatever you want, literally
Mhm.
whatever you want. And people chose to recreate life. Like we work all day, we come home, we get on the video game, and we go to work in the game. And I was like, this, what? This doesn't make any sense. And so now I think that's just been exasperated with the fact that we are so interconnected from globalization and now AI, where there's like the line, like you kind of could see it before, at least with dial up to data.
Right.
You were like, no, we're on the internet. Whereas now, I mean, my phone is like an extension. So everything is so gray. That's why I call it the garble machine, because you really, or the war machine is another way to see it. Um, it's really hard to tell what is what. And so it just kind of comes down to tracking the patterns through it. But I always did find that interesting that when faced with infinite potential, we recreate the part of life that already is like that mundane, which I doesn't to me doesn't make any sense. I mean that's partially why when I dropped out of PhD land, I was like, I'm building a volcano. I don't want to play by the program. But the other side of a program, I just say is programs are meant to be broken. There's a reason there's a new line of character. It expands the program. It makes things more interesting. It gives more potential. So
I do
I'm not
like the analogy of Second Life though, because I think that, I think it reflects on how the overlay of everything, because I mean, I played Second Life. It was interesting. See, like within the first month that I played it, you have a world of limitless possibility. And my character was like prowling sewers to rape people. And, um, then it was hilarious when I realized I was playing it when I moved to Florida, and I was just like walking around on beaches. And and people would ask, you talk to people in the game and be like, well, I live on a beach, but here I am on a virtual beach. So it makes you think that at some point you're trying to return to a center, you
right.
know. And so I think that it's a subconscious thing of why people do that is because there's a sense of, I think it's an overwhelming sense of lack of control with people. At some point, people will say that they don't feel like, they're in control of their lives or they're looking to become centered. Like a lot of religions try to teach you how to become centered. Um, so in that process, I think that people kind of return to what's familiar because they think in a video game, they at least have control over the mundane life they lead, where in reality they don't, even though they're
That
doing the same thing.
you make a really valid point because I'm a big fan of Grand Theft Auto, but as I play online, the thing is I don't engage with the other people on the game, and I don't play the game itself. I just liked walking around and checking out the world. And so when I was really stressed out, especially during school, sign in Grand Theft Auto, steal a car, and just like mow people down on the beach. Like it was
Right.
really relaxing, and or like just go out and mass murder. Not that I would do this in real life, but it just there was something to. It was a release, or if I, wasn't in that aggressive of mood, I would Grand Theft Auto 5 run from like every pool, and I'd have to like was it parkour jump from pool to pool to pool to pool. Like at one point, I was going swimming in a river, and like another player came up and was like, "Do you need help?" I was like, "No, I'm just swimming." Like you're saying, like, or I could go outside and swim in an actual river. Why is
Right.
maybe it's that instant gratification of being able to create the thing that I can't in my life.
And there's the comfort of you're doing it all from the safe confines of your domestic prison.
Yes, yes.
So,
Volunteering into that hell that you were kind of talking about. That um,
yeah, but cool. I mean, I totally get with the simulation for sure.
yeah, I mean, I can talk about that for.
So I'm gonna knock my other one kind of is a simulation in some way. My number two pick is the Paul McCartney is dead conspiracy. This is often referred to as the Paul is dead hoax. One of the reasons it's my favorite, like I'm not a huge Beatles fan. In college, I worked at a record store where the owner was a super Beatles freak, and he's the one that introduced me to this, where like he would play the records backwards and you'd hear the messages of like Paul is dead, miss him, miss him, miss him. Um, and then I met a guy later who wrote a book called Hellhounds on Their Trail that got into the Paul McCartney death hoax. And I think he had a separate book just about Paul is dead. So it proposes that Paul McCartney died in a car accident and he was replaced by the winner of a Paul McCartney look-alike contest and named William Campbell. And I've heard anything from they taught William Campbell how to play bass, maybe enough to fake it. My theory is that I think that John Lennon and George Harrison took over all the writing because you see a distinct shift. Like they got away from pop songs and got really weird. They started doing drugs, I think, because, I mean, they grew up with Paul McCartney, so that's how they handled the grief. Um, and they kept putting these clues on the album because they felt bad about it. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, when Time Magazine, so this is how big it got, Time Magazine did a issue about it and they put the real Paul McCartney on the cover and interviewed him. I mean, if you're William Campbell, there's no way you're giving that up. You're
Right.
set for life as somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in fact, then like he married Linda McCartney as like so that was William Campbell. So Paul McCartney was dead. So there was not like a switching wives or anything at that point. So that was an easy transition to make. And the Beatles were like huge at that point. So that's the record company wasn't backing down from that. The
Yeah.
Beatles didn't want to back down from that. Um, the catch comes in 1969 after the fact, the Beatles had broken up. Charles Manson trials. Charles Manson goes on trial and says that the Beatles inspired him to do everything and that they put messages on their albums for him.
Oh man.
So at this point, the Beatles have to say, we didn't do anything for anybody. There are no hidden messages on our album. But what about Paul McCartney being dead? No, that's not real either. So they can't admit to that because then if they say, oh, well, We did
Yeah,
put these messages about Paul McCartney. So you could have done that to Charles Manson too. And the government, since the other conspiracy here is that it's not, it ties in because a lot of them are so connected
right, right.
that since Charles Manson was a project of MK Ultra, the government wanted to make him look as crazy as possible and get him focused on all this other stuff. Yeah, the Beatles influenced. It wasn't those drug studies that you showed up to that we were hosting in that fake hippie house that we had set up. Um, so yeah, so a cover up for a cover up for a cover up, which is like, it's like with lying, like you have to one covers up the other to cover up the other to cover up the other. So then you're painted in a corner, can't get out of it, you know. I mean, I think it's, William Campbell had some pretty good producers early on and hooked up with people that made Paul McCartney have a solo career. But now, it's just pathetic. Because Paul McCartney's dead. Ringo Starr's the only Beatle that's still alive. What
You
a
made some
what a
excellent point. I mean,
ripoff.
I also went down a rabbit hole with that because when I saw your list originally, I was like, oh, because I've been disconnected from music for a while, so I don't. Anyway, I it just you make so many valid points, especially with the Charles Manson, because then you again going back to the simulation, you don't really know where the edge is. So and back then, like the internet wasn't like it was, so we couldn't necessarily go to a direct source. We just have to take what we're being fed. Um,
Yeah, because originally this gained steam in college newspapers because there was in the 60s there was no internet.
right, right,
So it
right,
was
exactly.
kind of like even without an internet when we came up with the theory that if you synced the Dark Side of the Moon album with the third Roar of the Lion and watched The Wizard of Oz, that they would sync up. Um, that just happened from Stoners in High Times magazine. So that was not, not even a thing. But yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying, how it would line up with the um, matrix of here's the balance of reality that we've created. And maybe it's encouraged by that energy, or however, maybe the government knows and has come up with, well, we can't tell people the reality is not real because then our bosses, the archons, will delete us. So, in order to maintain this illusion, it gets into the matrix at that point.
I feel like this is since I don't know much about that topic. I feel like my next list is a nice parallel or mirror.
All right, well, we're going to get into that in part two because we
Oh,
are running down on time.
okay.
So, you guys, if you want to go further down into the matrix with us, make sure to watch part two.